Okay, our next little topic as we go on now to database error handling is also related to validation, but it's a good time to talk about it. I've driven this point home a few times that we're getting this immediate validation feedback that is coming from the data annotations we put on, right? So without even posting back to the controller, we can have all this as long as the browser is reasonably capable of supporting some client-side script, right? So this is great that we have all this, but there's a limit to what you can do with the data annotations, right? At the other end, of course, there's lots of database errors can be raised, or we can be notified by the database system itself if there's certain types of errors, like say we violate that unique constraint on OHIP and things like that, right? But I want you to be aware that there is a middle ground. There is something else that we can do in between. If you think back to when you were learning your databases, right? You talked about simple check constraints, but then you also could have a rule. Rules on a table, right, would allow you to create a rule that would involve multiple fields at the same time, right? Well, that's what we're going to basically introduce next. Say, for example, if you need to do some logic that involves more than one property, right, of the class, all of our annotations only apply to an individual property by itself. So fortunately, we have a method of doing that. We're going to implement an interface, IValidatableObject. I can just select that, and look at that, it's even offering to implement it. Very good, thank you. So it adds it down here at the very bottom, okay? So we have this validate event that happens automatically, right? Now, right now, it's just throwing a not implemented exception. So I'm gonna put, just as a simple example, a bit of code in here. Let's say we want to, we already checked that, if they haven't provided information, we're going to give them feedback on that and so on. What about the date of birth, though, right? Well, it's nullable, but what if they enter, obviously they're going to get feedback as well if they put in something that isn't a valid date format, but the truth is we're going to have this is going to provide metadata hinting to the browser to use a calendar control for input. That kind of eliminates that. But it's the date of birth. What if they accidentally, in the calendar control, pick the wrong year or for whatever reason, pick a date in the future? That can't be valid, right? You can't say, oh, I'm going to add this patient and they will be born next year sometime. No, it doesn't work that way, right? So we have to be able to check that the date of birth entered is not in the future, right? Now, yeah, sure, I could use like range and things like that if I knew that it had to be between a couple of fixed dates, but this is dynamic. Date time today, well, that changes every day, right? So because of the dynamic nature of this logical test, I have to do it here. I can't do it earlier on in a simple annotation, right? Thank goodness we have IValidatableObject, right? So basically, of course, it is nullable, so I'll get value or default, and if it's in the future, greater than today, right, then I can say, hey, guess what? I have a validation result here, a problem with the validation, and I can pass, notice here, an error message, date of birth cannot be in the future, and then member name. Now, notice it's a collection, okay, but I'm only going to actually ever use one here in my experience. So the member name is which member or property is it going to be shown underneath. So I want it shown underneath the date of birth. By the way, if you leave this blank or null, our pages always have a summary, validation summary div or span at the very top of the page, right? And then that's where it would appear. So it might just be a general comment, not on a specific property. But this one here, it makes sense to show it, I think, right beside the date of birth. So that's an example of something you can't check earlier, right? But we can check it here. And this, of course, gives us a chance to see if the object is valid before we even attempt to save it to the database, right? Okay. Now, did you think of something when we were making our changes earlier, adding our OHIP coverage, right? We have our coverage enumeration now. That's great. But right now, look at this. The OHIP number still marked as required. What if this patient is an out-of-province or international patient? Well, they are not going to have an OHIP number. In fact, we should not have an OHIP number entered in that case. So to check the validity of this situation, the type of coverage in correspondence with the OHIP number, or in coordination with the OHIP number, we need to make some changes here. And this will be another, right? Another opportunity to see the value of our new IValidatable object, right? So we're going to get rid of the required because we can't have it required because international or out-of-province patients won't have an OHIP number. So I'm going to get rid of that required altogether, right? Oh, by the way, also, I want to then make it nullable. I could take out the default now if I wanted to. It really doesn't hurt, but I can take it out. Okay. So still, the regular expressions like this, they only are applied if there's something entered, right? If it's null, it just ignores them, right? So there we go. Okay, so that's much better. Now I can leave the OHIP number blank. But wait a second, what if they are an Ontario client that we want to make sure they do enter the OHIP number? Well, once more, back down to IValidatableObject. We can do more complex logic for our validation in here, even accessing, as we are in the class, all the properties of the class itself. So code like this works reasonably well, right? OHIP number required, but only if they have OHIP coverage, right? So we can check our enumeration. If coverage matches coverage.ohip, right? Okay, that's good. But in that case, if the OHIP is null, there you go. Validation result, OHIP cannot be left blank since the patient has OHIP coverage, right? And then we show that right underneath the OHIP number itself on the screen, okay? Else, so they aren't, the coverage isn't OHIP, so it's either out of province or international. Well, here, let's take it a step further. The OHIP number should be blank then, right? So if it's not equal to null, then we're going to give feedback there. OHIP must be blank since the patient does not have OHIP coverage, right? There we are. Okay. Now, actually in my seed data right now, I have somebody that is going to be an issue. Okay, well, actually, let me show you that. So if I bring up the medical office initializer, come down to patients here, right? Notice for Fred Flintstone, we didn't even specify the coverage, right? Same with Wilma Jane Flintstone, right? So it will take the default, the first member of the enumeration, which is OHIP, which is our good default to use anyway. Now, Barney Rubble, we're saying the coverage specifically is OHIP. That's perfectly fine. And they have an OHIP number. Look at this. Jane Doe, out of province coverage, but there's an OHIP number. So now this is actually going to be a violation of that logic, of that validation rule. So when we first go to edit Jane, we're going to be getting a chance to see that in action. Okay? All right. I'm just going to run it here. Okay, I'm coming into patients. Pick anybody. I'll pick Barney here. Click edit. Right, there's the OHIP number. We see the coverage is set to OHIP. That says it should be. So if I take the OHIP number out now and try to save, there you go. OHIP cannot be left blank since the patient has OHIP coverage. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Back to list, right? I won't save my edit. I'll just go back to the index. Now let's try Jane Doe here. Click edit. Okay. Even if I just click save right now, there you go. OHIP must be blank since the patient does not have OHIP coverage. They are out of province, right? So yeah, that's in my seed data, I was seeding it in an invalid way. So this time I have to make sure the OHIP number has been cleared before I can successfully save. Oh, okay. All right. Not null constraint failed, patient OHIP. You know why? This is good. This is good. Chance to talk about this. I made a change to the patient model, right? We made it so the OHIP is no longer required, but we didn't tell the database. How do we do that? With a migration, right? Okay. Good. All right. So let's go in, make a new migration. So let me go down here, Tools, NuGet Package Manager, open the console. Give a little more room here for the console. Now, I don't have any history because I've closed Visual Studio, but I have my common commands. So I could try to make a new migration, right? I could just come in here, get my add migration command. Okay. Nullable OHIP. Can be the name for the migration. Okay, and let's just try to update the database now. By the way, later on we'll show how we can get this apply update database business set up so it happens automatically. But anyway, for now, there we go. All right. Okay, so let me just run again. Come to patients. We'll edit here. And again, we get warned, yep, there's a problem. Let's delete it. Now, can we save? Yes. Okay, so there we go. So you see, we've been able to do quite a bit with migrations, but, you know, something in the back of my head is kind of scratching my conscience. What have we kind of forgotten about? Well, let me come back one more time to our medical office context. Remember one of the other things in our on-model creating, in the Fluent API here, look at this. We made a unique constraint on the OHIP number. Well, we're okay. Fortunately, SQLite ignores null values in a unique index, so we don't have to change anything. That's why I got away with it. I didn't have to worry about this issue. Not all databases work the same way, so in some cases you would actually have to put on a special modifier to the type of index you did to allow there to be more than one null value, right? Otherwise, null would be considered a value, and you could never have more than one record with a null OHIP number, right? But no, SQLite is good this way, and so there we go. All right, so we could have started a new set of migrations, but you know, so far I've got 3, and it seems to be working fine. All right, yeah, I think I'm good. That's long enough for now. This next chunk is we're going to go back, revisit our controllers, and go into much more detail in how they all work. But we'll leave that to the next video.